The quiet evening. It was a calm and peaceful evening in the Thompson household. The sun had just begun to set, casting a warm golden glow over the house. Inside, Sarah, a loving mother, was busy preparing dinner in the kitchen. The smell of roasted chicken and vegetables filled the air, making the house feel cozy and welcoming. Sarah glanced at the clock. 6:30 p.m. Her husband, Tom, had just finished a long day at work, and Lily, their 7-year-old daughter, was playing with her toys in the living room. The evening seemed normal, just like any other evening. Sarah hummed quietly to herself as she stirred the pot on the stove, the sound of the sizzling food mixing with the soft background music playing from the radio. Tom walked into the kitchen, his tired eyes lighting up when he saw his wife. He smiled at her, walking over to give her a kiss on the cheek. "Smells amazing in here," he said, pulling out a chair to sit at the table. Sarah smiled back at him, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Glad you think so. Dinner will be ready in about 20 minutes. How was work?" Sarah asked, hoping for a relaxing evening after a busy day. "It was all right," Tom replied, but his tone seemed off. It wasn't a tone Sarah recognized. He wasn't angry, but there was something in his voice, something distant, almost like he was distracted. Before Sarah could ask what was on his mind, she heard a loud giggle from the living room. It was Lily, her voice high-pitched and full of excitement as she played with her dolls. Sarah smiled. She loved hearing the sound of her daughter's laughter. It reminded her of how lucky she was to have this family. "Hey, sweetie," Sarah called out. "How are you doing over there?" "I'm playing with my dolls, Mommy," Lily replied cheerfully, but Sarah noticed a slight edge in her voice, a hint of tension, as if something wasn't quite right. Tom stood up from the table and walked over to the living room, where Lily was sitting on the carpet. He bent down and whispered something to her that Sarah couldn't hear. Lily giggled again, but this time her laughter seemed forced. Sarah's smile faded, but she didn't think much of it at the time. After all, it was just a normal evening, nothing out of the ordinary. Minutes passed, and Sarah continued to work in the kitchen, chopping vegetables and stirring the pot on the stove. She was lost in her thoughts when she heard the soft thump of footsteps from upstairs. At first, she assumed it was Tom going to change clothes after work, but then she realized he hadn't mentioned anything about leaving. She glanced toward the staircase and saw Tom walking upstairs, his hand resting lightly on Lily's shoulder. The two of them moved together, heading to Lily's room. Sarah raised an eyebrow, wondering why they were going upstairs when dinner was almost ready. She shrugged it off, thinking they were just going to spend a little time together before eating. However, as the minutes passed, a strange feeling crept over Sarah. It was quiet. Too quiet. Sarah stopped stirring the pot. She turned off the stove and wiped her hands on a towel, then walked toward the staircase. The house was eerily still. She had expected the sounds of her daughter's laughter, but now everything seemed unusually quiet. Sarah frowned, her intuition telling her something wasn't right. It was the kind of feeling you get when you sense something's off, even if you can't explain why. She waited at the foot of the stairs, wondering what was happening upstairs. Maybe they were just playing quietly in Lily's room, but then again, it was so quiet. The silence seemed strange, especially for an evening when the house had been full of life just moments before. The quiet stretched on, and Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Her heart started to race. Was something wrong with Lily? Why wasn't she laughing anymore? Was Tom upset with her? She took a deep breath and decided to check on them. Sarah hesitated for a moment, unsure if she was overthinking things, but her motherly instincts couldn't be ignored. She needed to make sure everything was okay. Quietly, Sarah began to walk up the stairs. The house creaked under her steps, and the sound echoed in the silence. Her thoughts raced. What could be happening in Lily's room? Why had the noise stopped so suddenly? As she reached the top of the stairs, Sarah paused, trying to listen. There was still no sound. She was about to knock on Lily's door when she heard a soft noise. A faint sob. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to send a chill down Sarah's spine. Her heart began to pound in her chest. It wasn't the sound of play. It wasn't laughter. It was a cry. A soft, muffled cry. The kind of cry that a child makes when they're upset or scared. Sarah froze. Her mind raced. Why was Lily crying? And why hadn't Tom come down yet? Without thinking, Sarah reached for the door handle and pushed the door open, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea what she would find behind that door, but her concern for her daughter had taken over. The door creaked as it opened, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The shock. Sarah stood frozen at the door, her breath caught in her throat. She had expected to see something innocent, perhaps Tom and Lily playing quietly, but what she saw instead made her heart race. Tom was sitting on the edge of Lily's bed, his back to the door. His face was tense, and he wasn't looking at her. Lily was sitting on the floor, her tiny hands clutching a stuffed bear, her eyes wide with fear. She was trembling, her lip quivering, and a tear stained her cheek. The sight was enough to make Sarah's stomach drop. Lily. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, the concern flooding her chest. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" Tom's head snapped up, his eyes wide with surprise. He hadn't expected Sarah to come in. For a brief moment, his expression seemed almost guilty. He quickly stood up, stepping between Sarah and Lily, as if blocking her from seeing something that wasn't meant for her eyes. "It's fine, Sarah," Tom said quickly, his voice strained. "Everything is fine. We were just talking." But Sarah wasn't convinced. She could see Lily's frightened face, her tiny body still shaking. This wasn't normal. She could tell something was wrong, something deeper than just a simple conversation. "No, Tom," Sarah said, her voice stronger now, filled with worry. "What happened? Why is Lily crying? What did you do to her?" Tom's expression faltered. He looked away, unable to meet Sarah's eyes. He ran a hand through his hair, looking flustered. "I didn't mean to upset her, Sarah. We just had a little disagreement. It's nothing." But Sarah wasn't buying it. She could feel the tension in the air, the way Tom was avoiding her gaze. She could see that something wasn't right, something that wasn't just about a little disagreement. Lily, who had been quiet up until now, suddenly looked up at Sarah with tear-filled eyes. "Mommy, I didn't mean to make Daddy mad," she said, her voice barely audible. Sarah's heart shattered at the sound of her daughter's words. She quickly rushed over to her, kneeling beside her on the floor and pulling her into a tight hug. "Oh, baby, you didn't do anything wrong," she whispered, stroking Lily's hair. "You never have to make Daddy mad. You're not to blame for anything." Lily clung to her, her sobs growing louder. He said I was being bad. He said I couldn't play anymore." Tom flinched at Lily's words, but Sarah's attention was now entirely on her daughter. She held Lily close, trying to soothe her with soft words. But inside, a growing unease took root. Why would Tom say such things to their daughter? Why would he make her feel like this? Tom stepped back, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape. "Sarah, please. It was just a moment of frustration. I didn't mean to hurt her." His voice wavered, but Sarah could tell it wasn't the apology she wanted. It wasn't the reassurance that everything was okay. "Tom," Sarah said, her voice growing firmer, "this isn't about a moment of frustration. This isn't okay. You don't speak to our daughter like that. You don't make her feel like she's done something wrong when she hasn't." Tom's face reddened, and he opened his mouth to say something, but Sarah cut him off. "I don't want to hear it, Tom. Not right now." Sarah turned her attention back to Lily, who was now calming down in her arms, her sobs quieter but still persistent. She looked up at Sarah, her eyes wide and filled with confusion. "Mommy, I didn't mean it," she said softly. Sarah wiped away a tear that had fallen down Lily's cheek, shaking her head. "I know, sweetie. I know." Tom watched them for a moment, his face hardening. There was something in his expression, something Sarah couldn't quite place. She had seen him angry before, but this This was different. She had never seen him act like this around Lily, not until tonight. "Sarah, you're overreacting," Tom said sharply, his voice filled with frustration. It was just a few words. It's not a big deal. But for Sarah, it was a big deal. The way Tom had acted, the way he had spoken to their daughter, it wasn't just a few words. Something deeper was going on, something that Sarah couldn't ignore. She knew she had to get to the bottom of it, and she couldn't let this go. Lily, sensing the tension between her parents, suddenly looked down at her stuffed bear, her small hands clutching it tightly. The room felt heavy with silence as Sarah continued to hold her thoughts racing. She turned her gaze back to Tom, her eyes filled with determination. "I don't care what you think, Tom. We need to talk. I need to know what's really going on here." Tom's jaw clenched, his fists tightening at his sides. For a moment, the tension in the room seemed to thicken, and Sarah could feel her own heart racing. What was happening to their family? Why was Tom acting like this? And why had he hurt their daughter? The truth felt like it was just out of reach, like a dark cloud hanging over them. And Sarah knew she had to find it before it consumed everything they had. The hidden truth. The tension in the room was palpable, each second stretching longer than the last. Sarah's heart was still pounding in her chest, her mind racing to piece together the strange events of the evening. She could feel the weight of her daughter's small body in her arms, and she hated how vulnerable Lily seemed, how she clung to her as if she needed protection from something. Someone she shouldn't have to fear. Sarah could feel her pulse quicken as her eyes locked onto Tom. He was standing near the door now, arms crossed defensively across his chest, his eyes avoiding hers. His usual calm demeanor had been replaced by a tightness, something that felt cold and foreign. Sarah had never seen him act this way before. It was as if the man she had spent years with was now a stranger. "Tom, what's going on?" Sarah's voice cracked, the question hanging heavy between them. Tom didn't answer at first. Instead, he turned away, walking to the window and looking out. His silence only deepened the unease that Sarah felt. She knew something was wrong, something deeper than just a moment of frustration. His behavior, the way he had spoken to Lily, it was all too strange. "Tom," Sarah repeated, more firmly this time. "I want the truth. What did you say to Lily?" Tom's shoulders stiffened, and for a brief moment, he seemed to hesitate. Sarah's eyes never left him, her expression hardening with determination. She wasn't going to let this go, not without understanding what had really happened. He sighed heavily, rubbing the back of his neck as though he were trying to find the right words. "It's not what you think, Sarah," he muttered, his voice low. "It was just a little scolding. She wasn't listening to me, and I lost my temper." "Lost your temper?" Sarah echoed incredulously. "You scared her, Tom. She was crying. You made her feel like she did something wrong, like she was bad." Tom shook his head, but there was a flicker of something behind his eyes, something Sarah couldn't quite identify. "It wasn't like that," he insisted, though the strain in his voice betrayed him. I didn't want her to act out anymore. It's hard, Sarah. It's hard to be the one who has to keep everything together." Sarah felt a pang of guilt at his words, but it didn't change the fact that something was very wrong. She knew Tom better than anyone. He wasn't a perfect father, but he had always been kind, patient, even when things got tough. Tonight, though, something had shifted. Something was broken. "Tom, if you're feeling overwhelmed, we can talk about it. But you don't have the right to treat Lily like that. She's just a little girl. She shouldn't be afraid of you." The silence between them grew even thicker. Tom's eyes darted around the room, and Sarah could feel the walls closing in. It was as though he was trying to hide something, something he couldn't bring himself to admit. His defensiveness was starting to look less like guilt and more like fear. "Tom," Sarah said softly, her voice gentler now, "you're scaring me. What aren't you telling me?" Tom finally turned around, his eyes dark with frustration. "I don't know how to fix this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted to hurt Lily. But everything, it's just so overwhelming. I'm not who you think I am anymore, Sarah. His words struck Sarah like a blow, and she took an instinctive step back. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was saying. What did he mean by that? What was he hiding from her? The air in the room seemed to crackle with a sense of dread. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Sarah could feel the weight of his words in the silence. There was more to this than a simple scolding. Tom was hiding something, and she could sense that whatever it was deep, too deep for her to ignore. Lily, who had been quietly watching the exchange, suddenly looked up at her mother. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Is Daddy going to leave us?" Sarah's heart broke at the question, and she quickly pulled Lily back into her arms. "No, sweetheart," she whispered, kissing her forehead. "Daddy isn't going anywhere. I just need to figure out what's going on." Lily clung to Sarah, her small hands gripping her tightly. It was clear that the little girl was scared, not just of Tom, but of the uncertainty in the air. Sarah's chest tightened. She had promised Lily that everything would be okay. But the truth was, Sarah didn't know if everything would be okay. Not anymore. Tom's eyes softened for a moment as he looked at Lily, but the hardness returned just as quickly. "I didn't mean for her to feel that way," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I swear, I didn't." Sarah's mind was racing. She could feel the tension between them, the crack in their family that seemed to be widening with each passing moment. What had happened to the man she married? What had happened to the man who used to smile and laugh with their daughter, who used to protect them both from the world? The truth was slipping further out of reach, and Sarah felt helpless in her search for answers. But she couldn't stop now. She couldn't let it go, not when Lily was caught in the middle of this storm. With a deep breath, Sarah turned toward Tom once more. "We need to talk. All of us. Right now." But as she said the words, she realized there was more to uncover. More than just Tom's behavior. Something was wrong with their family, and Sarah wasn't going to stop until she figured out exactly what it was. The unspoken secret, the quiet hum of the evening, had turned into a heavy, oppressive silence. Sarah's mind whirled with confusion and fear, her every thought tethered to the mysterious shift in Tom's behavior. She looked at her husband standing in the corner of the room, his back turned as if retreating from her questions, from the confrontation they both knew was inevitable. The air between them seemed thick, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She had always trusted Tom, believed in his love for their daughter, and never doubted his intentions. But now, that trust was faltering, and the truth seemed to be just out of reach, hidden behind his distant gaze and the coldness that had crept into his voice. "Tom," Sarah said, her voice breaking the silence, "you have to tell me what's going on. Please, I can't stand not knowing." Tom didn't turn around. His hands were clenched at his sides, his body tense, as though he were bracing for something. Sarah's heart sank. It was as though he was preparing for battle, but there was no enemy here except for his own secrets. "I don't know how to explain this, Sarah," he finally said, his voice low and strained. "You wouldn't understand." "I'll understand, Tom. I just need you to be honest with me," Sarah urged, taking a tentative step toward him. "We've always talked about everything before. Why is this different?" Tom turned slowly, his eyes meeting hers with a look she hadn't seen before. It was a mixture of guilt and fear, but there was something else, something dark and unsettling. "Because," he began, his voice barely a whisper, "I've made mistakes. Big ones. And I don't know if you can ever forgive me." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "Mistakes? What kind of mistakes?" Tom shook his head, his face shadowed with regret. "I've been hiding things from you. Things that could destroy us." Sarah's chest tightened, panic rising inside her. "What are you talking about, Tom? What have you been hiding?" Tom took a deep breath, his hands trembling as he ran them through his hair. "I don't want to lose you, Sarah," he said, his voice cracking. But I can't keep living this lie. There's so much I haven't told you, so much I buried down deep. I don't know where to start." Sarah's heart raced as she tried to process his words. He was hiding something, something that had been eating away at him for far too long. The uncertainty of it all was unbearable. How could she have missed it? How had she not seen the signs? This wasn't just about a little scolding or a lapse in judgment. It was something far bigger, something darker. "Please, Tom, you have to tell me," Sarah pleaded, her voice softening as she reached out to him. "I can't help you if I don't know what's really going on." For a long moment, Tom remained silent, his eyes locked on the floor as if searching for the courage to speak. Finally, he raised his head and looked at her with a mixture of fear and sorrow. "It's about my past," he said, his voice barely audible. "Things I did before we met. Things that I thought I could leave behind, but they're catching up to me now." Sarah's stomach dropped. She felt a wave of unease wash over her. She had known that Tom wasn't perfect, but this felt different. She had no idea what kind of past he was referring to, but she could sense that it wasn't something trivial. "What do you mean, your past?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady, though her heart was racing. "What kind of things?" Tom swallowed hard, his throat tightening. "I've been involved in things I shouldn't have been. People from my past. They've been threatening me, Sarah. I didn't want you or Lily to get caught up in it, so I tried to keep it all hidden. But it's been hard to keep it together. I've been making mistakes. I've been acting out of fear." Sarah's mind was spinning. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Tom, her Tom, had been involved in something dangerous, something that could now tear apart their family. The man she thought she knew was being consumed by a past she couldn't even imagine. "You've been hiding this from me all this time?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and hurt. "And now you're saying that's why you've been treating Lily like this? Because of your past?" Tom nodded slowly, his face contorting with guilt. "I didn't mean to, Sarah. I never wanted to hurt anyone, especially not you or Lily. But I was scared. And when I'm scared, I do things I regret." Sarah's heart shattered at the realization of what had been happening. Tom wasn't just hiding something from her. He was living in constant fear, trapped by the consequences of his actions from years ago. But what did this mean for their future? Could they ever go back to what they were before? Her mind raced with questions, with a desperate need for answers. She had to understand what Tom had gotten involved in. What kind of threat was now hanging over them? And most importantly, she had to protect Lily. She couldn't let her daughter be caught up in whatever mess Tom had made of his past. "I don't know what to do, Tom," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know if I can forgive you for this." "I don't expect you to," Tom said quietly, his voice filled with despair. "I've already lost you, haven't I?" Sarah didn't answer right away. The weight of his words pressed down on her, and the air in the room seemed to grow colder. She wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was clear: their lives had changed forever. The truth was out, and now they would have to face the consequences together. But would they survive it? The unraveling truth. The silence in the room felt suffocating. Sarah could hardly believe what Tom had just confessed. Her mind was reeling with questions, trying to piece together the fragments of his past that he had kept hidden for so long. The truth had come crashing down on her, but it still didn't make sense. She needed to understand more, needed to know how deep the lies went, and what kind of danger they were really facing. "Tom," Sarah said, her voice shaking, "this is too much. I need to know everything. Everything you've been hiding from me. I can't just sit here and wonder what's going to happen next." Tom looked at her, his eyes filled with regret and fear. He had hoped that by hiding the truth, he could protect her. But now, the secret was out, and there was no turning back. He could see the hurt in Sarah's eyes, and it made his chest tighten. He never wanted to put her through this. He never imagined that his past would catch up to him like this, threatening everything they had built together. "I know it's a lot to take in," Tom said quietly, looking down at his hands. But you need to understand, this isn't just about me. It's about us, Sarah. It's about our family. Sarah nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on him, waiting for him to continue. What do you mean, Tom? What kind of danger are we in? Tom hesitated. This was the part he had been dreading. He had hoped it would never come to this, but now there was no choice. He had to tell her the whole truth. There are people from my past, Sarah, he began, his voice steady but filled with tension. People I got involved with before we met. Dangerous people. People who don't take kindly to anyone crossing them. And now, they found me. They found us. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean, they found us? Are you saying we're in danger right now? Tom looked her in the eye, his expression grim. Yes, they've been threatening me, threatening to hurt you and Lily if I don't do what they want. I thought I could handle it on my own, but now it's too late. They're getting closer, Sarah. And I don't know how to protect you. The words hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. She had always trusted Tom, never imagining that he could be involved in something so dangerous. Her world, which had seemed so stable just hours ago, was suddenly crumbling before her eyes. She took a step back, her mind spinning as she processed the gravity of the situation. But Tom, why didn't you tell me sooner? Why didn't you trust me enough to share this with me? I was trying to protect you, Tom said, his voice thick with emotion. I didn't want you to carry the burden of my past. I thought I could fix it on my own, that you and Lily would be safe if I just kept you in the dark. But now, I see how wrong I was. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. We could have faced this together, Tom. We're a family. You didn't have to bear this alone. Tom's shoulders slumped in defeat. He knew she was right. He should have told her sooner. He had kept her in the dark for so long, thinking he was doing the right thing, but now it felt like he had only made things worse. He had pushed her away when he should have leaned on her for support. I'm sorry, Sarah, he whispered. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant for any of this to happen. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She needed to think clearly, to figure out their next move. This wasn't just about her and Tom anymore. It was about Lily too. Their daughter was in danger, and Sarah couldn't afford to be paralyzed by fear. She had to protect her family, no matter what it took. I need to know more, Tom, Sarah said, her voice firm now. What kind of people are we dealing with? What do they want from you? And how do we stop them? Tom swallowed hard, his face pale as he looked into Sarah's determined eyes. They're part of a criminal organization. I made a deal with them years ago, and I thought I could get out, but they've kept pulling me back in. They want me to do something for them, something I can't do, Sarah. But if I don't, they'll hurt you, or worse, Lily. A cold chill ran down Sarah's spine. The fear in Tom's voice was enough to make her heart race. What kind of thing do they want you to do? And how long have they been threatening you? For a while now, Tom said quietly. It started off small, with little things they asked me to do, things I thought I could handle. But lately, they've been more aggressive. They want me to use my position at work to help them get something they need, something I can't give them. They've threatened to harm you, Sarah. They've been watching us. The weight of Tom's words was suffocating. Sarah's mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. Who were these people? How could they be stopped? And most terrifying of all, how far were they willing to go to get what they wanted? She looked at Tom, her heart aching for him, but also filled with determination. We need to go to the police, Tom. We can't handle this on our own. Tom shook his head, panic flashing across his face. No, Sarah. They have people everywhere. The police won't help us. We're on our own in this. Sarah's stomach churned. Tom was right. They were vulnerable. The realization hit her like a wave. They were up against something far bigger than they had ever imagined. I'll do whatever it takes to keep us safe, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. But we have to face this together. We have to be smart. Tom nodded slowly, the relief in his eyes evident. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he wasn't alone in this, but he also knew that the road ahead would be long and dangerous. They had no choice but to face whatever was coming together. The plan unfolds. The room was heavy with tension, the air thick with the weight of their new reality. Tom had been upfront about the danger, and now Sarah was left grappling with the fact that their lives were about to change forever. The truth was no longer something she could hide from, and neither could Tom. They needed a plan. As they sat in the quiet living room, the only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Sarah's mind raced, her thoughts spinning in every direction. The possibility of their daughter, Lily, being caught in the crossfire of Tom's past was too much to bear. She couldn't let that happen. Not on her watch. "Tom," Sarah said, breaking the silence, her voice firm and steady. "We can't wait any longer. We need to act now. These people aren't going to stop until they get what they want." Tom looked at her, his face filled with both admiration and concern. He knew she was right. They couldn't wait any longer. But he also knew the risks. If they made a move too soon, it could push the criminals to act faster. They had to be careful, strategic. But Sarah's resolve was unwavering. "We need to get ahead of them, Tom," Sarah continued. "We can't wait for them to make the next move. We need to take control of the situation." Tom took a deep breath, nodding slowly. Sarah's determination was infectious. He had been trying to protect her from the truth, but now he saw that keeping her in the dark had only made things worse. They were in this together, and he wasn't going to let fear or hesitation hold them back anymore. "I've been thinking about that too," Tom said, his voice low. "I've got a few connections from my past that I can call in. People who owe me favors. It's risky, but it might give us a chance to get the upper hand." Sarah raised an eyebrow, her mind calculating the potential consequences. "Who are these people, Tom? Are they trustworthy?" Tom hesitated, clearly unsure. "Some of them are. Some are. Not so much. But they might be the only way we can get out of this without it getting worse." The uncertainty in his voice sent a shiver down Sarah's spine, but she didn't show it. They didn't have time for hesitation. They needed to act, and they needed to act fast. "Okay," Sarah said, her voice resolute. "We'll work with what we've got, but we need to make sure we're covered. We need a backup plan, and we need to get Lily somewhere safe, just in case things go south." Tom nodded, his face grim. "I agree, but I'm not sure how much time we have. These people are relentless. If we don't make our move soon, we'll be in even more danger." The thought of their daughter being caught up in this nightmare sent a wave of panic through Sarah. She couldn't bear the thought of Lily being hurt, especially because of Tom's past. But she couldn't let fear paralyze her either. They had to stay focused, stay strong. "All right," Sarah said, standing up and pacing the room. "Let's put this plan into motion. We'll start by contacting the people you trust. I'll make sure Lily stays with my parents for the time being. We'll keep her out of harm's way." Tom stood up as well, his posture tense but determined. "It's not going to be easy, but I'll do whatever it takes to keep you both safe." Sarah walked over to him, placing a hand on his arm. "I know you will, Tom, and I'm going to do everything I can to help. We're in this together." There was a moment of silence as they both absorbed the gravity of their situation. They knew the path ahead would be dangerous, and they couldn't predict what would happen next. But they also knew that they had no other choice but to fight. "I'll make the calls," Tom said, turning toward the door. "I'll try to gather as much information as I can. But we need to be careful. The wrong move could make things worse." Sarah nodded. "We'll be careful, but we can't wait forever. I'm ready to do whatever it takes." With that, Tom left the room, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. She felt a mix of fear, anger, and determination. Fear for her family's safety, anger at the situation they had been forced into, and determination to do whatever it took to protect them. She walked over to the window, Looking out at the quiet street below, the world outside seemed so normal, so peaceful. But inside, everything had changed. Their world was no longer safe, no longer predictable. It had become a place of danger, of secrets and lies. But Sarah knew that she couldn't back down. She had a daughter to protect, and no matter what it took, she would fight for her family. The criminals who had threatened her husband's past didn't stand a chance against the fierce love she had for her family. As she gazed out the window, Sarah made a promise to herself. She would protect her family, no matter the cost. They would survive this. They had to. The final confrontation. The day had arrived. The air felt heavier than usual, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Sarah stood in the living room, her eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. The house felt quiet, but in her mind, the tension was unbearable. They had done everything they could, made the calls, set up the backup plans, and arranged for Lily to stay with her parents. But now, there was no turning back. Tom was outside, talking to his contacts, trying to gather the last bits of information they needed to confront the people who had put them in this situation. Sarah couldn't help but feel a surge of anxiety as she thought about what they were about to face. She had never imagined that her family's life would turn into a battle for survival. The man she had married, the father of her child, was now a target because of his past, a past he had tried to leave behind. But as much as he wanted to protect them from the truth, it was no longer something they could ignore. As she stood there, staring out the window, Sarah's phone rang. She quickly grabbed it, her pulse quickening. It was Tom. "Sarah, it's time." His voice came through the phone, calm but laced with urgency. "They're on their way. We need to move now." Her heart skipped a beat. She quickly gathered her things, making sure everything was in place. Her thoughts raced. There was no more room for mistakes. She had to stay focused, had to stay strong. For Tom, for Lily. They couldn't let their lives be torn apart by the past. Within minutes, she grabbed her coat and headed for the front door. Tom had arranged for a safe place to meet, away from prying eyes. They couldn't risk being followed. As she stepped out onto the porch, the chill of the evening air hit her, a sharp reminder of the danger they were about to face. She had no idea what was going to happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. This was the endgame. Either they would survive, or they wouldn't. There was no in-between. The drive to the meeting point was tense, each mile feeling longer than the last. Tom was beside her, his expression serious, eyes darting to every car, every corner. They couldn't afford to be followed. The people who were after them were dangerous, ruthless, and they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. Sarah's mind raced as she thought about the risk, but there was no choice now. They had to face it. When they arrived at the designated location, a secluded warehouse on the edge of town, Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. This was where it would all end. The warehouse stood in the distance, dark and foreboding, casting long shadows in the moonlight. There was no sign of life, no indication that anyone was there, but Sarah knew better. They were already here, watching, waiting. Tom pulled the car to a stop and turned to her, his eyes locked with hers. "This is it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you ready?" Sarah nodded, taking a deep breath to steady herself. "I'm ready." They stepped out of the car, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the still night. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was too quiet, too calm. But they had come this far. There was no turning back. As they approached the entrance of the warehouse, Sarah felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The door creaked open, and they stepped inside. The place was dark, the air musty and cold, but there, in the shadows, they saw them. The figures of men, silent and unmoving, their eyes glinting in the dim light. One of the men stepped forward, his face partially illuminated by the faint light coming from above. He was tall, with a cold, calculating look in his eyes. He didn't say anything at first, just watched them closely, as though sizing them up. Tom took a step forward, his voice steady. "We're here. What do you want?" The man chuckled softly, a sound that sent a chill down Sarah's spine. "What do I want? Oh, it's not what I want. It's what you owe. And you've been running from that debt for a long time." The tension in the room thickened, Sarah's heart racing. She glanced at Tom, whose jaw was clenched tight. This wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about survival. "I don't have it," Tom said, his voice growing colder. "Whatever you think I owe, it's in the past. I'm done with that life. Leave us alone." The man laughed again, but there was no humor in it. "You don't get to decide that, Tom. Your past is coming for you, and you'll pay for it." Before Sarah could react, the man snapped his fingers, and the figures in the shadows stepped forward, surrounding them. The game was over. Tom's hand subtly moved to the inside of his jacket. "I didn't want it to come to this," he said, his voice low and steady. But Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders, the readiness in his posture. He had a plan. And then, the sound of a loud crash echoed through the warehouse, followed by the roar of a car engine. The warehouse door exploded open, and headlights pierced the darkness. A figure emerged from the car, moving swiftly, his voice calling out to the men. Enough. The figure was Tom's contact, the one person he had trusted to come through in this moment. With that one word, everything changed. The figures in the shadows hesitated, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. Tom stepped forward. "Now you have a choice. Leave or face the consequences." The silence that followed was deafening, and Sarah held her breath, waiting for the decision that would change everything. Would they leave, or would they fight until the end?